Does money motivate? Does money make people go and get things done and work harder and become more productive? And does it does it help you or enable you and me feel happier, create more productive and meaningful lives? The answer is no. And that's in spite of popular opinion, and in spite of the behavior of organizations forever. Most organizations believe that you give someone a bonus that's going to make them work harder, or if you pay them more, well, they're more likely to produce the goods. Now, there's something really strange about that, because if you look at the workforce and workplace relations, I can't speak for any other country except my own. But for example, when nurses and the police, the Gardaí we call them, when firefighters and street sweepers and people who do the most important work in our society, teachers, when they look for more pay, it's generally a fight. They have to fight with the government for more money. So most employers, I would say, are uh, are drilled and educated and schooled towards giving people as little as possible and getting the most they can out of them. So there's this game goes on, and we're led to believe somehow through popular myth, or at least become a popular myth, that if you get more money or you're promised more money, it'll make you work harder. Well, it's nonsense, and I'm going to tell you why now. This is day 6. I hope it's day 6. Let's just have a look. We are on day 6, and we're talking about motivation. Motivation being one of the core skills that we need to develop if we are to do our best work. But not only do our best work, be happy and motivated and all the rest of it in doing that work. We're working our way around this framework here I'm showing you on screen, and we're at motivation. Motivation, let me just switch on that little icon for you right here. Motivation is, and the reason for this icon is to illustrate the energy that's required, or the energy that's found in people, as Ed Deci says, the energy for action. It gets us up in the morning and moves us through the day, hence the iconography there. So motivation is key, but it's not cognitive. You can't simply decide to be motivated. You can't simply think about being motivated and then become motivated. It doesn't work like that. It's a non-cognitive skill, you might say. It operates below the level of personality, of personal identity, rather. It works below the level of intention. System 1, as Daniel Kahneman refers to it, this thinking logical system. It operates of its own accord, given the right conditions, as I mentioned in day 5 yesterday. Given the right environment, people will be motivated, self-motivated, and this is the most powerful form of motivation, according to Ed Deci, of self-determination theory. Him, Richard Ryan, and various other researchers have built this idea of human motivation and flourishing well-being over the last 20 or 30 years. And I wanted to address in this clip the idea that that money motivates. And to illustrate the popular belief, I wanted to show you this little screen grab. This is from today's article, and it was a poll that I ran, albeit a very small sample now, but I have found this to be true, regardless of where I put this poll up, whether it was on Twitter or whether it was on LinkedIn or wherever I poll my readers, you guys. It tends to be the same. So does money motivate? Now, it's quite a binary kind of response I was looking for, and you could say, well, how's that really accurate? There are always variants and there are always circumstances that influence our thought about this question. But by and large, in a gross way, I asked the question, does money motivate? And in this case, 73% of people said yes. And that's despite the truth being completely contrary to that. So money doesn't motivate. First of all, in an essay, or a paper rather, a study by Timothy Judge and his colleagues in 2010, they conducted a meta-analysis. So they examined multiple studies for, I think it was up to nearly 100 samples, different samples of individuals from various workplaces and so on, that examined the relationship between pay on the one hand and satisfaction with pay and life satisfaction. So the results found, in very simple terms, that pay level, so where you are on the pay scale, was correlated. In other words, there was a degree of relationship between your level of pay and your satisfaction with your job. The correlation was extremely low, 0.15. If something is absolutely correlated with something else, it's a value of 1. In other words, they're the same thing. The further they are apart, the smaller that correlation becomes, all the way down to 0. And when that correlation, when you run the analysis, is in a negative, is in the negative side of the scale, well then it's negatively correlated. Okay, so higher wages, higher happiness, positive relationship. Lower wages, higher dissatisfaction, negatively related. Okay, so you get the picture. So in other words, job satisfaction and pay level were not related very strongly. It was quite weak, in fact. And satisfaction with pay was quite weak as well. So they did additional studies or subsequent studies, and quoting the authors, they said, employees earning salaries in the top half of our data range reported similar levels of job satisfaction to those employees earning salaries in the bottom half of our data range. So, in other words, doesn't matter what you earn, people's satisfaction with their job will be what it is. And there are a lot of factors involved in that: the environment, the workplace itself, the type of work, the people we work with, and so on. And in that case, it doesn't matter how much money you give somebody. It's not going to improve how they feel about their work. I've often had this conversation with my wife as well. She's a nurse. So I would regard her work, and a lot of people would regard the work of nurses, as vocational. They're there because they are drawn to the work for what it is, to care for people. And in her case, she works in a hospice. So people are dying of all ages, men, women, you name it. Young men, young women with families, old people, and everyone in between. And it takes a lot, in my eyes, it would take a lot for somebody to want to work in that environment. But she chooses that, and so do her colleagues. She earns, I don't know what it is, 55 grand a year, if she works overtime and all the rest of it. Now, to me, that's not enough for a nurse, not simply because she's my wife, but because people doing that kind of work deserve to be paid more. Why are they not? Well, they enter a union, and the unions negotiate with the government for pay, and who knows whatever else goes on there. The point is, you could give her 100 grand. It wouldn't make her more happy in her work, or more inclined to work, or work harder. If you paid her less, it might. And that's because there's an expectation, and people need a particular level to live. And my argument would be, if you pay somebody enough that they don't have to worry about money, they will be self-motivated as long as they're doing what they want to do. So the whole philosophy around pay negotiations in the workplace runs counter to what we know about motivation and how it works. Money does not motivate people. And here's another reason why. In fact, I'll get to this in a second. Another study by Deci and Ryan. Deci, Ryan and Koestner in 1999 found that after studying 128 studies, they ran a meta-analysis as well, right? 128 studies examining how extrinsic rewards, pay, bonuses, holidays, other types of rewards, right? Recognition. These extrinsic rewards had a negative impact on intrinsic motivation. So somebody might be intrinsically motivated energized, they want to be there, they want to engage in it, and then all of a sudden you bring rewards into the equation and their motivation is negatively affected. Why is that? I want to talk about that a little bit. They suggested in the study that engagement-contingent, completion-contingent, and performance-contingent rewards significantly undermined free choice, intrinsic motivation of people in those studies. However, positive feedback and a positively oriented environment increased self-interest, which, if you remember what I said yesterday, makes a lot of sense. They say in their concluding remarks, careful consideration of reward effects reported in 128 experimental studies led to the conclusion that tangible rewards tend to have a substantially negative effect on intrinsic motivation, with the limiting conditions we've specified. Even when the tangible rewards are offered as indicators of good performance, they typically decrease intrinsic motivation for interesting activities. So in other words, if people are interested in something, pay them enough to cater for their own living needs and let them off, even pay them a little bit more, it has a positive impact. Let's see now, where was I? Let's go back here for a second. Okay, I know what it was. So back in the 50s, in the US, there was increasing attention given towards the psychological aspects behind why people do what they do, and particularly in the workplace. What is it about management, and how does it impact people's performance at work? And so the Hawthorne studies examined the different environments and how they impacted people's behavior. Long story short, they found that people working certain jobs, if they felt they were being observed, they tended to perform better or produce more. And that seemed to be taken as a given for a long time, until we realized that that only works if the work itself or the behavior is learned and known to the worker. So, for example, somebody working on an assembly line, putting the same piece of kit together every minute of the day, every day of the week, for months and years on end, they've mastered the art. Or the process. They understand. They don't have to think about it. Did I talk about System 1 and System 2 modes of thinking? I did a few days ago. System 1 is automatic. It's biased. It's not linked to cognition. It can operate by itself without much input from you. System 2, on the other hand, is slow, methodical, requires your thought and effort. Okay, it requires more energy and creativity and innovation. And so if you're working on an assembly line, it might have taken you a little while to get used to the process in order to program System 1, if you want to talk about in these terms. And so once you master the art, you can execute and you don't have to think about it. And in fact, if I gave you a reward to produce more, you're more likely to produce more and therefore obtain the reward. Now, it has its limits, its upper limits, right? And also, if that worker, or if you're the worker and you're working on the assembly line and I'm looking over you, or you believe that I'm looking over you, that's why management used to occupy the office up the top over the workshop with big glass windows where they could observe all the workers, because they knew that if the workers were observed in their assembly line jobs, they'd produce more. So when people understand and know they're being surveilled, they will be more productive to a level, right? Now, things change when the work requires some innovation and creativity and collective thinking and creative thinking, right? It doesn't work. So if you stand over someone and you expect them to create something or innovate or solve a problem, come up with a creative solution to a problem because you're standing over them, forget about it. It doesn't work. They shut down. Their cognitive systems they stop working. And you know this probably if you're on the receiving end of it. I know it. I remember for years I was on the tools using these to make a living, and I used to hate when the homeowner or the business owner was standing over me, looking at me, doing the work, I just asked them to excuse me and head off, go somewhere, because I knew the detrimental impact that observation had on my creative work. And everybody's the same. The same goes for rewards, contingent rewards, right? Bonuses and so forth. You can't reward someone enough for them to be creative. In other words, you can't be creative on purpose. You have to be spontaneously creative. You have to almost disengage this kind of the front mental lobes of the brain and allow your more creative aspects come to the fore. So observation, surveillance, and so forth, contingent rewards, they don't work if you want people to be creative and innovative and come up with wonderful solutions and new products. Forget about it. They'll work to an extent if you have an assembly line and the work is predictable and known and systematic. So remember that. But it only works to an extent. So, long story short, money doesn't motivate. It demotivates if there's not enough. But giving people more money doesn't have increasing levels of motivational outcomes, okay? Remember that. If you want to do what you want to do and earn loads of money doing it, do the work first. Find the work that you love to do that engages your mind and your heart and your soul, and throw yourself into it and allow yourself to become immersed in it, and the money will come. I think it boils down to trust. You got to know your value as well. That's important. But I think a good place to start is to do something that engages your mind and you were intrinsically motivated to do, rather than doing it because your parents said so, or your boss said so, or otherwise, or your teachers said so. All right. See you tomorrow for day 7. I'm still on the topic of motivation, and I'll chat to you then. All right. Mind yourselves.